So joining me today is Ajit Khurana. Ajit is one of the longest serving angel investors in all of India, I believe. He's been investing in early stage companies and mentoring startups since 1998, longer than most in India. Ajit, welcome aboard. Thanks so much for coming today.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so entrepreneurship, of course, is all the rage today in places like Bangalore and Mumbai. Are entrepreneurs, some of them bootstrapping and getting started with customers' funds, or are they all writing a business plan and holding out for VC? What's happening?
I I think if it were up to them, they would all want to get venture funded.
Yeah.
So, since it is not really everybody's choice to get funded, in the sense it's not that the VCs are very keen to give money to everybody, some of them are bootstrapping, and some others are in what I call perpetual incubator mode, which means they are constantly moving from one accelerator to the other until some venture capitalist would go ahead and fund them.
So they're career incubatees. They just
That is
hop
correct.
around one to the other. Yeah.
That is
And
correct. Yeah.
for how long can they get away with doing that in India?
What has happened is that in the recent past, the ecosystem, which is accelerators, corporate driven programs, etc., co working spaces who give you some form of scholarship, these are mushrooming very fast. And pretty much like the startups who would do anything to gain a customer, even the ecosystem players somehow have started demonstrating the same tendency. So I have seen that there could be people in some form of accelerator getting free credits on some cloud server somewhere, doing almost very little, doing very little for as much as a full year, waiting for some funding to come their way.
Amazing, amazing. So how hard is it to raise one's first capital today, seed capital in India? How tough a job is that?
So in principle, it should be the A plus startup which would get funded. However, we come across all the situations where you find that startups who you might regard as Bs and Cs and maybe worse getting funded. And the reason is that there is a lot of new capital. It's not just the quantum of capital, but there's also a lot of new capital in the space, which has brought in a lot of new players who have unique perspectives and are not necessarily following all the acceptable standards and models. And they might recognize a startup as an A plus, which I might have rated as a C. So I think that the last 12 to 18 months have been just too having just too positive in terms of fundraising. I find it terribly easy, much more easy than it should have been to raise funds in the recent past.
Yeah, so where's this new capital coming from? Is it governments? Is it from bankers who've made a bunch of money and now want to invest? Where's it coming from?
There are two primary sources of capital. One is institutional capital, which is coming through venture capital firms because new international players are taking birth, new Indian players are taking birth. And the second, which probably has a significantly larger bearing on the seed level of investment, are angel investors who have heard of these fantastic anecdotal evidence that this
Yeah.
company got investors of 50x and 100x and sometimes 1000x return in an extremely short period of time, such as a couple of months or a few years. And now nobody wants to be left out of that party.
So everybody wants to join the party if they have a little bit of spare cash, and that's made it easier for entrepreneurs to raise funds, right?
That is correct. That is
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So you've been an active angel investor in India for much longer than most people have, especially longer than these newcomers. What's changed since you got started and now?
Three things have changed. First, at one point of time, which was probably all the way up to the late 90s, which is when I started, till as recently as 4 years ago, the investors were extremely powerful because if I have money, I could make entrepreneurs do absolutely anything. However, in the last 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 years, what has happened is that there are so many investors that they have, as a group, lost their power because entrepreneurs feel, okay, if you won't fund me, I'll get somebody else to fund me, or at least I can live under the belief that somebody else would fund me. This is one difference. Second is the average age of entrepreneurs has had a step function downwards. Namely, earlier we would see people 20s or mid 30s as being the median age group. Today I have found that a lot of them have moved to the early 20s, still in college or just out of college, because now the aspiration is no longer about a great business or a great return. It's about being a unicorn startup, which means $1 billion fund, which means you have to travel at reckless speed. And probably a 22-year-old is more likely to do that than a 32-year-old.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
is another difference. And I think the final difference, of course, as I alluded to earlier, is the availability of capital is substantial. And that, I think, is the availability of role models, that is startups that succeeded,
Yeah,
as well as the availability of capital has spurred this new wave of startups.
right. So is some of this new capital going to get burned? What's going to happen here?
So everybody logically says, and rightly so, that the new capital is going to get burned, right? However, when I talk to those specific individuals, and here I'm not referring to institutional money, but individual money, I know that they say that we understand that 1 out of 10 startups succeeds and all the usual slogans around the space, but they do not have the heart or the courage to bear that risk. So they know that in an industry aggregate, a lot of it will be burnt, but they do not necessarily believe that will happen to them specifically. So several
Yeah.
of them do 1 or 2 or 3 investments or as many as they could before they burn their first one. And then they just stop saying this is all nonsense and this is a bubble and all the other things that the negative sloganeers speak.
Yeah, so there's almost a churning of angel investors. New ones come in, do a few deals, one of them goes sour, and then they say, "Oh, this is too risky, I'll stop." But meanwhile, somebody else has come along and is following the same path. Is that what's happening in India?
You are right, but arithmetically, the number of people coming in, the velocity of that is increasing. So as one of them stops and takes a pause, 3 new ones come in, right? So, so,
Fantastic.
so, so that is explaining the phenomenon.
So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur looking for capital today, clearly in India.
If
Yeah,
there wasn't a better time,
yeah,
my forecast is there won't be a better time either, as in we are probably at the maxima.
yeah. So sometimes an angel investor will tell an entrepreneur, well, why don't you go get a paying customer first and show me that you've actually got something that's going to work here, that you're going to get traction, and then come back and I'll help fund you and help you grow. If you make a statement like that to an entrepreneur today in India, what happens?
So if you look at a seed level person, somebody who's getting started and does not, and where this question would be, or where the statement would be relevant, I find that one of the expectations entrepreneurs have from VCs is that they would add value other than capital also. And that VCs as well as angels is that we would add value other than just capital. And this is a belief that we ourselves have perpetuated, that this is not dumb money, this is smart money. So we might give them a suggestion such as go and get new customers or one of many other suggestions. I find that they are faced with two options. Either they can evaluate your suggestion, consider it, and maybe accept it, or they can just move to the next guy and try their luck again. Given A, there are too many next guys, it becomes very easy, and B, people from the investment community themselves do not have a habit of saying no very easily. They don't see any upside in rejecting a deal. They either say yes, which is in rare cases, or they kind of just drag it along perpetually. So this gives entrepreneurs, at least the ones who are trying to raise money for the first time, the wrong belief that they are on the threshold of raising money and they do not see the need to make a substantial shift. And that too, such a painful one as actually trying to get customers, because then their business would get tested. And tests do not always result in positive outcomes. So they'd much
Ah,
rather show the technology and the framework and raise sizable money to survive for at least a year. This has been my experience.
so rather than get the real feedback from the marketplace, which might be positive but might be negative, they fear the possibility of a negative outcome, and in the easy capital environment they find themselves in, they say, well, let me just go raise some money, and then I'll worry about whether I can get customers. And if I don't, then what? Are they thinking about that, or they're just not really thinking that far down the road?